Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And if you like what you're hearing today, the Patreon just has an extra bonus weekly episode of everything I'm watching that week. And I want to take a moment to thank our top patrons, and they are Chris Balga, Jeff Widman, Philip Barker, and Michael Cross. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. And on that note, if you like this episode, please subscribe and rate the show. It does help new listeners find us. Well, I've got a returning voice on the podcast today. I've got Matthew Malice of the Polyhedron Podcast. Say hi, Matthew.
Hello. Hello, everyone out there in movie land. I hope everyone's doing okay.
Yep. And so the last time I had you on, we were talking about the Burbs.
Yep. Not
Yeah.
the things that fly in the sky, but the places that the middle class is supposed to try to,
You
get a
kicked
house.
off a trend, actually. After that, we ended up talking about a lot of like Tom Hanks movies.
Oh, yay!
So
Uh, he,
you must have influenced the
he's a
next
gem.
choices.
He's a gem of an actor. So
He really is. He really is. So if they haven't heard that episode, would you mind introducing yourself just a little bit?
yes, as she said, I am Matthew Malice. I am the producer and co-host of the Polyhedron Podcast, a podcast about role-playing games. We've been going around for like upwards of 5 years now, or something silly like that. So we've been doing it for a minute. I also do like various other podcasting work here and there, and various other media. But that's primarily what I do right now, which is the podcasting with my buddies.
Nice. So my guest always picks the movie. What movie did you choose to talk about today?
I chose the 2014, I think, classic, the Grand Budapest Hotel.
Yes. I am a pretty big Wes Anderson fan. I like
Mhm.
quite a few of his films. He does have a very stylistic style, I guess, of
Well,
filming.
if you look at when you watch a Wes Anderson movie, you know you're watching a Wes Anderson movie.
100%.
There's no
And
mistaking it.
this is true. And I think this movie kind of combines the best of his visual style, but also just I don't know, he touches on some really deep stuff, some funny stuff. Like it's kind of got the best of everything he does, I feel like, in one film.
It uses his whimsy to its utmost.
Yeah.
Use quirky
And
style.
exactly. So tell me a little bit about your Wes Anderson journey. Like, did you see this movie when it came out in theaters? Were
Yes.
you already a fan?
Yeah, well, I saw when it came out. I was becoming a Wes Anderson fan. Now, I will say I've not watched a lot of Wes Anderson movies other than this one. I've watched Life Aquatic. I've watched, I think, it's the other one, The Royal Tenenbaums.
Hmm.
I've watched that one, and I've watched this one, and I will say this is the one I enjoy the most.
You
Um,
know, I think even if you were a dedicated fan, you would probably still say that. I've noticed that a lot of fans of his work still kind of hold this one up as like the best of. Like, so I don't think you're that far off. I will say I think you should watch Rushmore.
oh
That's one of
man,
my
I
favorite
remember when
films.
that was a big thing, and I just didn't watch it because everyone was talking about it. But that was like a long time ago. Like,
Yeah. I mean, this is like young Jason Schwartzman,
yeah,
but
because he did like Bottle Rocket, and then
mhm.
I think he did Rushmore soon after that. I want
Yeah.
to say. I mean, I may be incorrect. The IMDb will correct me.
No, it's one of his earlier films, and
Yeah.
it's a little less quirky.
Oh yeah.
It's a little bit more straightforward comedy, but it's one of my
Oh
favorites.
yeah. I was absolutely correct. 1996 was Bottle Rocket, and then 1998 was Rushmore.
Wow, so right after. Yeah.
Right. Like Rushmore was what I remember when people started talking about Wes Anderson, and then especially with the Royal Tenenbaums followed by Life Aquatic.
Mhm.
That's where like everything kind of just Wes Anderson was a name.
Yes. I agree, and I even think Rushmore might have had some, like, MTV connection or something, like, I feel like
Yeah,
I saw the ads for it a lot on MTV
it,
back when
it
MTV
became
was
a
MTV.
phenomenon amongst my generation
Mhm.
because you got to remember 1998. I am 16, 17. I'm getting close to the end of high school. It's about high school,
Yes.
but it's a weird. It's the artsy like high school movie because it's Wes Anderson because he doesn't do anything. He's not a. He has his own particular like as they would say oeuvre, his own particular
Mhm.
style. Um, and so because of that, Rushmore was like people talked about Rushmore because of how
Yeah.
unique it was.
Yeah, for sure. But, with this movie so I guess I've been a fan really since Rushmore, but, previous to this, I would say I really like Royal Tenenbaums. That was
Mhm.
probably my favorite film, and I think it's always gonna hold a special place in my heart. That was probably when I became, like, a serious fan.
That I
Um,
remember watching the Royal Tenenbaums and going, okay, I like this style. This is a very
yes.
interesting story.
Mhm, it's got this, like, '70s influence also that's interesting. I don't know, I just like the aesthetics of it, but also the story, and it's funny, like, it was good, and this kind of reminds me of that a little bit,
Oh
more
yeah.
than, like, Moonrise Kingdom or some of the other ones, Fantastic Mr. Fox. This is, like, almost like classic Wes Anderson, so,
Mhm.
it was an instant like when I saw it.
Yeah, the weird thing about like Wes Anderson, I know we're just talking about what Wes Anderson rather than Budapest Hotel
We'll
is
get to
that
it.
yeah, we will. Wes Anderson like has this weird nostalgia for a time that he's a young guy. Like
Mhm.
he didn't live through like in that era those eras. But he has
Right,
such a
right.
like a reverence for it. Well, I would say reverence just in the feel of it rather than anything in that the actual era.
Yes. Very true. I completely agree. Um, and I think that's made me like it more as well, yearn for an era I wasn't alive in either
Right, exactly.
because of
Uh-huh.
his movies. I did not see this in theaters though. Weirdly, I know for a fact I saw it on digital release, and I don't remember why. It must have just been a busy time in my life and I just didn't make it to the theaters. So I
Right.
saw it after the fact, and I was talking to my husband about it today, and he was like, I've never seen it still. And I was like, wow, that's so weird. Because now I've seen it twice. And I was like, I feel really bad you haven't seen it. Like, I think maybe you need to, like, immediately. Because I
Yeah,
feel like you'd really like
I
it.
would if anyone was like, "I've never seen it," I'd be like, "This is the one you need to sit down and watch."
Mm-hmm.
Because
100%.
you'll like it, you will enjoy it, because even if you're not, like, into Wes Anderson, it's whimsical and fun and funny enough that it just kind of gets you and
Yeah.
tells you a nice story. It's a sad story, but it is a nice story.
Mhm. And, to kind of piggyback off of that, we will be talking spoilers. I don't do
Mhm.
like a spoiler free and then a spoiler filled version. It's just kind of going to be a discussion, as you've heard so far. So I'm going to read a quick synopsis of the movie, but if you haven't seen it, I would pause here, go watch it, and then come back. So if you're back, here is a summary. It's in the 1930s, and the Grand Budapest Hotel is a popular European ski resort presided over by concierge Gustav H. Zero, a junior lobby boy, becomes Gustav's friend and protege. Gustav prides himself on providing first class service to hotel's guests, including satisfying the sexual needs of the many elderly women who stay there. When one of Gustav's lovers dies mysteriously, Gustav finds himself the recipient of a priceless painting and the chief suspect in her murder. It's just got such a fantastic plot for this
That
kind of
is
film.
that is 1/10 of the plot of this movie.
True, true, true. There's a lot going on
I
that
was
will
wondering how
probably
you were gonna like synopsis because
This
that
is
is not how this movie starts. That's
it's like the gist, but it's not all of it for
yes, that's
sure.
true.
Um, so this movie was the highest grossing movie to date of writer, producer, and director Wes Anderson's career.
Mm-hmm. Oh, nice.
I Yeah, I didn't realize that, but it makes sense. Like I do again, I feel like that's the one that I hear about the most. And despite the movie's title, Wes Anderson confessed in a national public radio interview that Prague was his main source of inspiration,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
which is cool. I like
yeah. It's
Prague,
just a
so
hotel called the Grand Budapest. Like,
that's true. Yeah.
yeah.
And then the opening bust and the film itself are inspired by the writings of Stefan Zweig. Although the films of Ernst Lubitsch may have played a bigger role,
Mm-hmm.
Wes Anderson came across one of I'm probably saying his name wrong, Zweig's novels in a Parisian bookstore, read it for 45 minutes, and then he bought it.
Well, okay. When you love something, when you get into something, you're into something.
Yeah, so I don't know, I just kinda like that. I feel like that's unique because most of his stuff is, like, all just from him, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
I kinda liked that little backstory about the plot. Did you wanna talk a little bit we kinda talked about Wes Anderson, so do you wanna talk a little bit about the cast?
Sure. Yeah, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about whenever you want to talk about it. The cast is all of the Wes Anderson sort of players. Like, you've seen any Wes Anderson movie, you've probably seen most of these people before.
This is
'Cause
true.
you got because you got was it Adrian Brody, you got Jude Law, Edward Norton, Bill Murray. You got Bill Murray, of course, is famous for being in Wes Anderson films. He's like in
Yes.
every single one. The person who took me away that I forgot was in this was Tilda Swinton.
Oh, yeah.
This was before Tilda Swinton was like Tilda Swinton. Like, I mean, she was a very well known actress and all that other stuff, but like, I didn't realize that was her because I didn't know who Tilda Swinton was when I saw the movie.
Ah. Yeah, I think my introduction to Tilda Swinton was probably weirdly enough, it was, Constantine. Remember
Yeah,
that
that was
movie?
mine. That was mine too.
Yeah. So it's like, "Oh,
100%.
that lady."
Oh, that
But you're
lady.
right, she wasn't, like, in everything the way she
Yes.
is
No,
now.
no. She was still grinding as it were, but she has definitely become much bigger than yeah, just a great like actors movie. Like,
Yes.
if you were to say anything about all these actors, is these are people who love acting. Like,
Mhm.
they obviously enjoy the fame, the fortune, all that fun stuff, but like there's a craft to a lot of these people because you can look at almost any of their like I want to say filmography. I guess that would be the right term. If you look at anything, the things they've done a wide range of things because they've obviously experimented with the craft of acting.
Mhm. Although I think the film kind of really centers on Gustav's character, which I think
Hmm.
was actually written for Ray Fiennes, and you really feel that
Oh
watching it,
yeah,
like, hard to imagine anyone else being that character, and it's just very enjoyable.
yeah, it's very interesting. Like, Will Fiennes is like a very intriguing character, but obviously the story is about Zero.
Yes,
Uh,
very true, because he's the one narrating it, and
yes,
ultimately it's his journey, but also his love for this mentor that
yes,
is a little odd.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but there's so many people I forget that were in it, like you're saying, like, I forgot Jeff Goldblum, which of course he would be, but, he's in it, Jude Law, Edward Norton, just so many names that
yeah, yeah,
Harvey
just
Keitel, like, it's
yeah.
just
Owen Wilson's in it.
Mhm.
I like Willem Dafoe just because
Oh, Willem Dafoe's
he has like
amazing.
two lines in the movie, but he's just a great presence in the movie because Willem Dafoe is amazing. Um,
100%, yeah. He Well, do you wanna talk, let's talk about some of your favorite scenes from the movie.
all right, let me think. Give me a moment. It has been a
Okay.
little bit. The so I can't. So I think before we get into like what my favorite scenes are,
Mhm.
uh, we need to just talk about the cinematography of this movie
Yes.
because
Absolutely.
when you think about this movie, it's not like, oh, I like this scene or that scene. It's like I liked how this movie was shot. Period. It's
Mhm.
very uniquely shot. It is all the aesthetics of Wes Anderson, but he does things with the framing of the film with the aesthetics of what you're seeing in each of the eras that you're in, because this is about a person's life, and
Yeah.
through the many different lenses of different narrators. And so in each of sort of the iterations or layers that you're in, you get a different aspect ratio, you get a different aesthetic because it's in a different time period. Also, the story itself sort of bends itself to the time period that it was in.
Mhm.
And also, the farther back you go, the more whimsical the story gets. And all of that feeds into making this such a unique film. Um, I think some of my favorite scenes would be anything where you're in the hotel dealing with the chaos of the hotel itself, of like the fast dialogue and the movement between rooms.
Mhm. Well,
That
that's
would,
something he does really well too, like the sort of like dolly shots where
yeah,
like he's panning across a room, sort of reminds you of like The Shining or something. Um, yeah, and I noticed too this time the colors, like the hues, and how big of a difference, like you were saying, sets a different tone for each time period that they're
yeah,
in. But
and
yeah,
yeah, and each something you'll know. So this is a bit of a story for me in watching this film. I did see it in theaters when it came out.
mm,
This is like one of the few Wes Anderson movies I actually like sat down and watched in the theaters. And my story behind that is it was one of the few movies I remember sitting down and watching it going, "Oh, I know what he's doing." When he started going between the different aspect ratios between the different times, I immediately picked up on, "Oh, he's trying to emulate that time period using the aspect ratio."
oh, like
Be-
that period of filming.
the period of filming, but also the common aspect ratio you would want consumed media. Like
Mm.
some of it's not all in cinema aspect ratio, some of it is in TV.
Oh, okay. I
But
didn't realize that. I'm not good at telling different aspect ratios, so
well,
that's interesting.
it's fairly obvious whenever like just the screen itself changes size.
Mhm.
Assuming it's not being auto adjusted for some reason, I don't think anything you would have watched would have done that.
Yeah.
Um, uh, is the moment he changed, because what really took notice is when he goes to the 70s,
Mm.
because he's in that cinemascope really wide big shot, and you get those long wide shots of inside sort of the retro Budapest, where it's not the classic Budapest, it's a
Yeah.
more modern looking, quote unquote modern looking Budapest.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That sort of retro 70s sci-fi, like we're trying to be hip for the future.
But also you can tell that the hotels had its heyday. Like, they're
Oh
really
yeah,
good at,
absolutely.
like, making you feel all of that in
Well,
that
it's very
scene.
quiet. There's no other guests around. It feels more like a weird isolated resort than like a bustling
Yeah.
hotel. But regardless of that, of like realizing when he goes to the 70s and he's in that white cinemascope, because I like watching movies like The Shining and a lot of other movies from the 70s, you get that wide shot, and then immediately clicked in my head, oh, he's trying to pull you into the media of that time.
Yeah. That's
The
true. I remember, like, explaining to somebody, because I guess the MASH movie came out in the '70s as well,
think
right? Like,
so,
before the
yes.
show, and I remember someone telling me they thought that show was, like, super boring and that it was hard to follow because all the characters like, there's a lot of master shots in that movie where all the characters are talking at the same time, like a
Mhm.
real conversation. And they're like, "This is weird," and I'm like, "This is like a style, like, of that time, though."
Mhm.
Like and it's also more like a real conversation because in a real conversation, it doesn't, like it's like cut to me, cut to you, it's like we're all talking at once, and you feel like you're really there, I think, when scenes
People
like that
interrupting
happen.
each other,
Yeah, yeah,
and sort of
exactly.
trying to get a like using their body language to interrupt other people so the
Yeah, yeah.
conversation can go quickly.
Mhm. Yeah, so, I mean, I agree with you, I hadn't thought about those scenes that way, but you're absolutely right, they do sort of put you in that time period, and that is, like, a really clever way to do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And even in like the modern, like the shots of the beginning, very beginning and the very end of the film, where you see the girl who's reading the book,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
those are in a very modern style,
Mhm.
both from like a visual standpoint, like a aspect ratio aspect point, and a visual style, but still being very Wes Anderson. But then as things progress, you start going back in time and things start changing and progressing in the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, and I like what you said about, the hotel being really busy and sort of enjoying that. I feel like I've always had, like, a soft spot for hotels, and
Yeah.
like, I'm not gonna say that I relate to Gustav, like, I'm not like Gustav, but I love the way he romanticizes I really like the way he romanticizes working for a hotel and being in service. Like, he's just it's so it's kinda like Downton Abbey or something, where
So
he's
I
just,
wa
like,
so
really romanticized that
so I'm gonna
aspect.
interrupt you here. I wanna cook your noodle a little bit because something I just
Okay.
thought of. The Gustav that you know and love, you enjoy, right?
Mhm.
Is the interpretation of
Of a boy.
Zero of a
Yeah.
boy who has no family, no father, and this is a retelling of a story to a guy who's gonna write a book about the Grand Budapest.
Right.
So think about that for a little while of just like this movie is drenched in unreliable narrator.
I think that's why it's so enjoyable, though.
Yes, it
Like,
is
all of it
100%.
is like that. Like, I think they give you a lot of hints in the film that Gustav's character is probably not the
Not a good
guy
guy.
that yeah, not the guy that Zero sees him as, but
Yes.
more of like a con artist that got away with a kind of a terrible crime.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that he and the busboy share commonality in the fact that I mean, it's never explicitly said, but I feel like Gustav comes from a more working class background, and that's why he's so obsessed with wealth
Yeah.
and rising his station in life, and he's been able to sort of hide behind his position. But I mean, even at some points in the movie we see where he sleeps at night and where he eats, and it's not glamorous.
No.
So
No.
he's always kind of shooting for getting out of there at the same time that he romanticizes the job to everyone else.
Well,
He's kind
he's
of a big pony.
yeah, he's not a big phony. I think he's like I this is what I do in my life. This
Yeah.
is who I am. And Gustav will never be anyone who's he's not, as it were. At least from what
Oh,
Zero
okay, okay.
perceives him to be.
Yeah.
But again, this is all just like the narrator of who we because we'll never really see Gustav through the lens of Gustav. It's a
Right.
lens of something else that's going on.
Let's talk a little bit about Tilda Swinton's makeup.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's also why you don't really notice it's Tilda Swinton.
Yeah, because she's playing, like, someone who's, like, 84, I think, or
Yeah, like
94.
she's a very old woman.
Very old lady that,
Yeah,
is in love with Gustav, and this is what Gustav does, he woos ladies. I like that scene where they said, they're always old, they're insecure, they're vain and blonde. And he's like, "Why blonde?" He's like, "'Cause they all were."
yeah, yeah.
Um, but her makeup in this movie is really good, and I saw, like, a quick snippet that Wes Anderson said, "Hey, you know what? We got the budget on this one. Let's get the best guys in town and, like, have really good old age makeup." So that's kind of why it looks so good. It kinda stands out in the film because there's not a lot of other special effects, but
Yeah.
she does look really good.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's really good, and I just enjoyed like she's not in the movie long because she's sort
No.
of the main thrust of like the thing that changes Gustav's life in order to force Zero into a new and different situation.
Yeah. Yeah, she is killed, and we later find out murdered.
Mm,
And now there's a big, as happens with when rich people pass on, there's a big upset over who gets her inheritance.
yep.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's
There's
go
yeah,
ahead.
and there's about a painting. I forgot was it the Boy and Apple? I think it's called.
Yeah, the boy and the apple or the boy and apple.
Yeah, Boy and Apple.
Yeah. And so then we get introduced to this side plot too of Zero and Cersei's character, Cersei Ronan, uh,
Yeah.
and this theft of this painting
Hmm.
that, so that Gustav can basically have an inheritance.
Yeah. Well, the idea is like the painting has been given to Gustav, and but everyone wants to because it's supposed to be priceless,
Yeah.
and but everyone's like, well, Gustav just the manager of a hotel. He's
Right.
not one of the children or blood of Tilda Swinton's character, and so everyone's trying to get it because it's worth the fortune.
Yes. Yeah. And we get introduced to like Adrian Brody's character, which he plays like a very different character than I've ever seen him play.
Yeah.
Um, he's her son, who is, intense to say the
Yes.
least, and is not happy about Ray Fiennes' character getting,
Yeah.
this
Well, every
inheritance.
character in this movie, especially as you go back, is more and more intense.
Yes,
Is more a caricature than a character, I would
very
say.
much so. Yeah.
Like Zero is the only one that we really get like a almost a 360-degree viewpoint on.
Hmm. Yeah, that's pretty true. What are some of the other scenes that you
Oh,
enjoy?
I'm trying to remember because I've been talking about this and like my brain's been trying to go through because, like I said, since this is an intense movie, there are many scenes that just like pop out at you and sort of like it's almost an oversaturation because
Yeah.
there's so much going on and so much sort of like data that's just assaulting you because all the colors are bright and interesting. All the framing is really good. The I guess some of the good another scene I really enjoyed because this is sort of like a hint of things to come is the when they have to go up the mountain to the monastery
Hmm.
and it all becomes sort of not animatronic puppetry.
Yeah.
It all becomes sort of like the Fantastic Mr. Fox 3D animation. That's right, like actual puppetry and like it because they instead of like showing you like a fantastical chase, they do this like puppetry thing of showing you them going up sort of the ski lift to the abbey where they have to go hide out.
Hmm. Yeah,
That's
that's
on.
true. I hadn't thought about that.
Mhm. It's one of those. That's definitely a takeaway scene because just of like it's them trying to hide and then them realizing they have to go back to deal with the situation. They just can't, you know, lay low, as it were.
There's a lot of really good scenes in this movie. Like you said, it's like you can almost pick any scene.
Mm,
Um, there's a couple things that I really enjoy. Number one is when he ends up like when Gustav ends up in prison,
yes.
and he's still like, no matter what situation he's in, he's very like optimistic that, there's been a mistake, he's gonna get out. And there's like a scene where he's, talking to Zero from behind bars, and he tells him, that you have to be really tough in prison, and that he got beat up, but then that person becomes a friend.
Yep.
And he's like, I hope you'll meet him, actually.
Mm.
It's just like
Well,
at the time you kind of think he's lying, but then later we do meet him.
yeah. Well, also, listen. Another thing about Gustav, and this again more fantasy, like something fantastical is like Gustav is the consummate gentleman, no matter what
Yes.
situation he's in. So when he's
Yeah.
in prison, everyone starts like falling in love with him because he's just a very nice man. Like Gustav is just trying to be very helpful to everyone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It,
the
it it's funny. And
Yeah,
the
the
and
prison
the
break scene
prison
is
break
very
is
good.
great.
Yeah, the prison break scene's pretty good. I enjoyed any of the scenes with Zero and Agatha,
Oh
just
yeah.
because that's such wonderful sort of the young love, like
Yes.
youthful love, uh, innocent love, and like the idea that and eventually they get married, and it gets sad after that point. But it's like just this idea, and you're rooting for them the whole time.
Yeah, it's a very sweet relationship, and she's a sweet person, and he is too, and so you kind of can't wait for them to get together. I
Yep.
I agree. The other big element that I like is the crossing of the keys club or whatever. That Gustav, towards the end of the movie, he's like, I'm gonna have to make a call. And like it
Oh
turns
yeah,
out
yeah.
there's this like sort of hotel concierge ring all over the world of people that can leap into action and help each other with all their connections.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And there's like a montage of all the different like Belmont or
That's
different
right. That's right. Now I'm remembering that scene, and that's where we get like cameos from a lot of other actors
yeah,
in
like
the
Bill
movie.
Murray. Yeah.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite scenes, there's like this running sort of joke of in each person they show us, each concierge is they're in charge, they're doing stuff, and then all of a sudden they get a call, and their bellboy steps in, kind of like the way that we've seen Gustav and his bellboy
Yep.
operate. But one of the funniest scenes is that they're on like a tennis court, and the concierge is like performing CPR on a collapsed guest, and then he gets a call, and he's like, can you step in? And the bellboy goes, and it just, I don't know. I enjoyed all that a lot. I thought it was very funny the way they portrayed that job being so incredibly important.
They're in
And
the
it was one of
hospitality
my
business, and that creates a brotherhood, a friendship, a fellowship, if you will, of
yeah. It was just like there are so many fantastical things in the movie, and then when we got to that point, I thought that was hilarious. I really liked it.
yeah, I enjoy the whimsy of it because it's Wes Anderson, it's whimsical. You kind of once you get into the mode, you really, really enjoy it. Like
Yeah,
it's just fun. And it's an adventure story. It's a
it
just
is.
at its heart, it's an adventure story about a person's life, but between that's taking place between World War I and World War II, which is kind
Hmm.
of important. Like the
Yeah.
cultural context of the movie is important because it's this time of like transition. Because when we think of World War II, when that starts off, we're thinking of basically the modern era, like the
Yeah.
modern geopolitical era, and like between the two great wars, you have this weird time where things are classical and new.
Hmm.
Like things are moving and changing. The world is both becoming smaller, but also more segregated. It's a very interesting little like time period. And
Yeah.
I think it captures that sort of tumlet very very well.
And Zero's background is pretty interesting. We don't learn until far into the movie when Gustav like insults him about like why he came to this country and stuff like that.
Yep.
And then Zero like tells him his history. He's like, "Oh, well I came over because of the war and I lost my whole family and all that." And then of course Gustav is very apologetic, but I think it just speaks to that time period you're talking about. Well, there's a lot of unrest on each side.
Yes.
But
Yes.
then there's also these long periods of like not having that. And so it's just like a weird eerie in between. And
Yeah.
as the film goes on, we
And the
get more of
Budapest, if
it.
you notice, is constantly trying to be sort of a neutral zone.
Yeah, kind of like a Casablanca
Yeah,
sort of
it's trying to
situation.
be a neutral zone, especially towards the end of the movie where we start getting sort of the hints, because it's supposed to. Is it actually supposed to take place in Budapest?
I
I
feel like it's
forgot.
like
I
not in
totally
a
forgot.
real country.
Okay,
Like they
yeah,
kind of kept it neutral by like making up a
yeah. I think I
country.
remember that correctly. It's like they kept
Yeah.
it like vague enough with the references that you couldn't really tell where it's from.
It feels like Eastern Europe, but
Yes,
not
yeah.
sure. Yeah.
It's someplace Eastern Europe. It's got mountains. That's
Yeah.
where it's at. Um,
Exactly.
and then just like the idea that it gets occupied eventually by obviously analogs to the Nazis, and
Yeah.
just the idea that this place is very important strategically, but it's also like culturally important. Therefore, it's both valuable and slightly untouchable.
Mhm.
But only because Gustav makes it like that.
Yeah.
And how he operates determines a lot of what starts happening and ultimately the deteriorate man, I can't talk tonight.
No, it's okay.
Deterioration. Uh,
It's just a difficult word to
yeah, yeah,
say.
sorry. I'm very nasally today because
I
um,
honestly I have been too like the past 2 weeks. I'm just kind of at this point embracing it.
yes, I live in a
Deterioration?
sinus.
I don't know.
Deterioration. Yeah, just the breakdown of the hotel
Mhm.
is because of because Gustav uh, can't be neutral anymore, and he has to take some sides, and he
Yeah.
just sort of pisses everyone off. And eventually, even though he's in the right in most of it.
Yeah. And also I feel like because he got so rich,
Yeah,
that's gotta be distracting too. His life doesn't depend on the job the way that it initially did, because he started as a bellboy as well, right? He kinda rose to that rank.
right. This is sort of like the passing of the torch story because Zero's like it's obvious like Zero's going to take over the Budapest one day because Gustav sees Zero as himself, as a younger version of
Yeah.
himself, and just this cycle is going to continue, and that's how the Budapest operates. But that is not how it ultimately it does go that way, but not in the way that Gustav wanted, obviously.
Yeah, well, Gustav has a pretty tragic end in the movie,
Yes,
that we later find out, defending Zero, which again, like, you do wonder, like, is that actually how it happened, or is that how he remembers it happening? But regardless, he steps in, when some, soldiers stop them when they're going, I think, across country, right?
yes, yeah. They resolved everything. They're taking like basically our own vacation.
Yeah.
and he basically stands up for Zero and ends up getting killed because Zero is obviously not very European looking,
Mhm.
and so he gets questioned and stopped a lot. And Gustav, being a prideful man, a man who's like, I'm a man who could talk his way of anything, ends up not being able to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
Yeah,
bummer. It's almost like maybe they shouldn't have gone on the vacation. I
yeah.
don't
Well,
know, but
if you notice, that's the movie ends very interestingly because all the tragic shit happens like in the last 10 minutes of the
it
movie.
really does. Like
It's
everything else is not tragic the way that the ending is.
everything else is like there are hints of sadness, there are hints of like ennui in the movie, but it's mostly an adventure all the way through because it's a man telling a story to an author about the hotel in his life. And
Yeah.
then to the end, he sort of wraps it up very quickly, saying, "This is what happened to Gustav. This is what happened to my wife and my child. This is where I'm at, and now I am telling you the story." And the man he's telling to is the man who writes the Grand Budapest Hotel book, which later the girl in the modern era reads.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because Gustav left everything to him.
Yep.
But you can tell he's just so devastated because he lost the most important people in his life. The riches never meant a lot to him.
No. Yeah.
So, like you said, in the end, he's like, well, yeah, now I have the hotel, but like, look around, it's kind of things have changed. And then you're right, then it kind of bookends with the girl reading the book at the end. And that
Yep.
statue is the statue of Gustav?
No, that I think if I remember watching something, they mentioned that is a statue. I think of that poet you talked about.
Oh, okay, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So
Okay,
to
so even in the context of the movie, he has influence in the film. Well, that makes sense
correct.
if he inspired it.
Yeah, yeah. That was like an homage to the man who inspired the whole movie. And because technically, if I remember watching this correctly, the man who's the statue of is, I think, who Jude Law is, because he's
Oh,
just known as
okay.
writer, young writer, and
Uh,
old writer and author. They're the same person.
I see. Okay, that
They're all
makes
the same
sense.
person through time because the whole point is it's about the man who writes the story about the story that is Zero slash uh Mr. Mustafa, which is what Zero's real name is.
Mm.
Because Mr. Mustafa and Zero are the same person.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, the guy at the end that's playing him as an older person. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, I don't think I put that together before, but that makes a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
sense.
Because the story is about a girl reading a book who's reading a who the story then goes to the author who's going to write the book, and about a time in which he had a writer's block, and so he went to this place called the Grand Budapest Hotel in the 70s, and he met a man named Mr. Mustafa, which is the owner of the Grand Budapest. He has dinner.
Mm.
He starts telling his story. That's when we transition into back in time, and by the end of the movie, you realize he's Zero,
Yeah.
and that this is what has come of the hotel and himself and his life.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
We
he's
kind
dealing
of
with
jump.
lots of
Oh, go
layers.
ahead. Oh, say that again.
He's
Sorry.
dealing with lots of layers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Man, it's like one of those things where, I really enjoy this film. I've seen it a couple times, but it kind of gave me more to think about. We this reminds me of another film we talked about.
Hmm?
Kind of reminds you a little bit of Jojo Rabbit.
Yes, absolutely,
I
100%.
can't imagine that wasn't influenced by this.
Oh, I doubt it. I mean, Wes Anderson's been he's a very good filmmaker. He's one of
Yeah.
those he's one of those artiste filmmakers, so artisans who's like, I don't have a lot of projects under my belt, but each one I do is very succinct and unique, and I have a very particular vision that I'm trying to get across. And so you can't help but have that kind of skill and talent.
Yeah.
Obviously, is going to make people inspire other people in the industry.
Oh, of course, yeah. Have you seen The French Dispatch yet?
No, I that is one I will be eventually seeing. It will probably be
Yeah,
I'll have
I
to
I
see it at
really wanna
home, but
see it. I haven't seen it yet either, but I've heard mixed things, but I feel like no matter what, I'm gonna enjoy it. So
I think it's one of those things. If you stand for Wes Anderson, you'll probably like that.
yeah, like most stuff he makes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but if you don't get it, it's probably not for you.
yeah,
Whereas I
yeah.
think Grand Budapest is absolutely for everyone.
I agree. When people don't like Wes Anderson films or they don't like the aesthetic, they don't like certain choices and stuff. I'm like, I get it. I mean, I like it, but
Yeah.
not everybody has to. But I agree with you that this movie does kind of stand apart in a lot of ways.
Oh, 100%.
Um,
It's a fantastic movie. It's gorgeously shot. The colors are so rich. And just the use of what the story is trying to do and the kineticism of the movie, even though it's kind of a longish movie. How long is the movie again?
Let me
Uh
see. What is the runtime?
it was
Actually, it's only an hour and 40 minutes.
really
Yeah.
okay. That's why it feels fast. I thought it was a longer movie, but I
Hey,
guess
you know
not.
what? It's unlike him, I think, to have a movie that short, but it's well timed, and
Oh
it
yeah,
it 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 goes through, like you said, so many time periods, it probably makes it feel a little bit longer, but,
yeah.
I don't know, I think it's probably the perfect amount of time, but I agree with what you're saying, and also I just like the fact that it introduced us to some actors that later went on to have big careers, like you mentioned Tilda Swinton and, of course, Saoirse Ronan.
Yep.
This is pre-Lady Bird, I think.
Yeah, and also don't forget Zero himself, Tony
Oh, yeah.
Rivoli. I probably butchered that name, Revoliori,
Revelori, maybe? I don't
Revolori,
know.
as Zero, who obviously is Flash Thompson in the Spider-Man films.
Oh, yeah, duh. I knew I recognized him. I
Yep,
forgot about that.
this was obviously this is an earlier role that he has.
Yeah.
So something I want to talk about this movie because I have to shout out movies with Mikey. Are you familiar with that hymn?
No, no.
Okay, so there is a sort of a critic is not the right term, sort of a um, examiner of movies and film, and he's
Mhm.
got a series called Movies with Mikey. He's
Oh,
a
okay.
very well written, and I rewatched his breakdown of Grand Budapest,
Oh.
and a lot of the stuff that he mentioned I saw in the film, but then he mentioned some things that I hadn't seen when I watched it and was just mind blowing. So I definitely recommend anyone who
Oh, okay.
likes listening to us talk and likes to know more about this movie should look up Movies with Mikey, The Grand Budapest Hotel. It's 15 minutes long. It's punchy. It works really well. Because something that I love when I watched his sort of breakdown of it is everything in the movie is framed,
Yeah.
both literally and metaphorically.
Mm.
Gustav is framed for a crime he didn't commit. Everyone who
Yeah,
walks
true.
everyone who walks through a door is steps in the doorway and you see a frame around them.
Oh,
The
wow.
the main MacGuffin of the movie is about a picture in a frame.
In a frame. Hmm.
And you're being told
Very
a
cool.
story in a certain frame of reference.
Uh-huh.
So
Wow.
I had to
Very
call that
cool.
out for movie because that was not me. That's all Mikey. He observed that, and I was like, "Oh no, you're right. You're 1,000% correct."
I love when you enjoy something, like truly enjoy something and enjoy talking about it, but then you just learn more about it by
Oh
talking to
yeah,
someone else or by watching or reading something someone else wrote. And I think that's a classic example of it. I wouldn't have noticed that, but now that you say it, I'm not going to be able to
it's one of the
unsee
things of I
it.
did not consciously put it together until he said it, and the moment he said it, I was like, "Dang it, you're correct. I should have noticed that, but I was just enjoying the film too much."
One more movie that this reminds me of, besides Jojo Rabbit, would be Paddington 2.
Never
Have you
watched
seen
any of the
that?
Paddington movies. None of them.
Oh my gosh, you have to see the second one. I know that's probably sounds weird me recommending that to you, but you have to see it because it is it actually kind of reminds me of this movie.
Okay, I
It's
will. I will make some time. I'll put some time on my
okay.
schedule.
So I can't remember who I heard it from. I heard it from a few different sources that were like, "You got to see Paddington 2." And I'm like, "Well, I haven't seen the first one." They're like, "Doesn't matter. It is so enjoyable." Um but it's got some similarities. Paddington ends up in prison. He's got to break out of prison. He meets a bunch of people in prison that love him, and they help each other. And so there's some crossover with this movie. I think you'll really like it. It's very endearing, and and well
It's a sweet
shot too.
story, right? It's
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's aesthetically, it kinda looks like this movie a little bit too. It's
Yep.
interesting, so anyway, well, was there anything else, any other scenes that we hadn't touched
Oh
on that
man, we promise we could go this movie scene by scene.
I
Um,
know.
I loved all of the chocolates and the cakes that they had.
Oh,
I
yeah,
wanted to eat
yeah.
all of them, and I felt
Yes,
so
they look
bad for
delicious.
Agatha, and I was like, that man is being so mean to you,
Mhm.
and you make all the delicious things. You should be running everything. Uh,
Yes, I agree.
I want to eat all the sweet things in this movie because they're all delicious looking.
I
Um,
also really like, we already mentioned him before, but I really enjoy, what's his name's character? Uh, Willem Dafoe. I really like
oh
Willem
yeah, yeah.
Dafoe's character.
Just like
His
as my buddy and I said a long time ago when we saw the movie, we're like, he's just like this gargoyle
I
in the
know.
movie.
He's perfect. The hand chopping stuff, the other yeah, just
The punching, everyone gets punched in the face, and then he just punches the last person, and he's the only one that's standing because he just wanted to punch someone in the face. Like, just the style of it, and just the delivery of it is so good.
yes,
It's
and when he's
so
on that
hammy,
motorcycle,
wonderful.
like, that's another interesting stylistic choice where
Yep.
it's, like, the old school, like, a screen behind him instead of him really being there. I don't know, I
Yeah.
just enjoy all that.
Like, you never see him yeah, you never see him on the motorcycle. He is just doing the classic, "I'm on a motorcycle with a screen running behind me,"
Yes.
a and therefore, that's the point of, it's supposed to reference you in the time period of, like, they wouldn't have used those types of shots back in the day when they were filming something. They would have done that, which is have
Right.
him just have a screen behind him.
Mhm. Yeah, now it looks so goofy, but it's also kind of endearing to that time period.
Right.
The last thing I wanna talk about is Panache.
Panache?
The cologne that
Oh.
Gustav loves.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
And remember
I completely forgot about that.
he's always bathing himself in Panache, and, and when he breaks out of prison, he, like, scolds Zero for not having this. Like, there's a few things that he expects Zero to just have,
Yeah.
and one of them is this perfume, and then later in the movie when, he enacts, like, the golden or the cross keys or whatever it's called,
Yep.
Bill Murray has it for him and, like,
Yes.
spritzes him
Well,
with it. It's
Gustav
funny.
expects he has a certain standard for his protege to
Mhm.
meet, and he needs to meet it. This is how this works.
Yeah, it's just I just and the fact that it's called panache is really
Yeah,
funny
of
too.
course, because he's got a lot of it, right?
Yeah. I think later, let me see, I'm gonna look up the timing of this really quick, just make sure I'm not wrong here. Yeah, he has a role that's I don't know, that kind of echoes back to this a little bit when he's in Hail Caesar too, Ray
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Fiennes.
yeah, yeah, a little bit, yeah. It's been a
Yeah,
while. I only seen Hail Caesar once. It's been a minute, but yeah.
Would that it twere so simple. Yeah.
Yes.
He and Tilda Swinton's in that too. But anyway, I he's just such a great presence in this movie and does such a good job, and it's very entertaining.
I
Um,
think I wanna put a shout out to, Murray Abraham, the guy
oh,
who
yeah,
played
yeah.
Mr. Mustafa. I think his gravity as this sort of world-weary, nostalgic owner of the Grand Budapest Hotel is very good. He doesn't have a ton of screen time, but it is very it grounds the movie and makes you think this was this was a really a lived life. Like, this was
Yeah.
somebody who really did go through some of this stuff, even though it's maybe a little fantastical, a little embellished, but he really did go through this life of this era of transition.
Yeah. I agree, and he played Antonio Salieri in Amadeus. I just looked that
Yes,
up.
yes, very
Didn't
good actor.
recognize him, but I'm
He's
like,
a
"Oh, he's
Yeah,
such a great actor."
he's an
Yeah.
amazing actor. Like, Wes Anderson never puts slouches in his movies.
I
Never.
know, I agree.
It
They're
never
always it's always a packed cast.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, there's even people we didn't even mention, like Tom Wilkinson's in it.
Yep. Edward Norton's in it.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, there's just tons of people, and it's so
yeah.
good. So, and I think the cinematographer was the same cinematographer that Wes Anderson basically has for all his movies.
Makes sense. Very consistent style
Yeah,
for sure.
exactly.
Well, I guess that brings me to my last couple of questions for you then.
Sure.
What so if you had to summarize what we've talked about, like what about this movie like keeps you coming back to it? You know, why did you think of it as like, oh, that's a movie I want to discuss and sort of talk about?
Oh, why would I want to? Because it's so unique.
Yeah.
It's so it's an okay. So this takes me back to a little bit of high school, sort of like the coming of age, because it is a coming of
Yeah.
age story.
It is, yeah.
But in high school, a lot of the times for a lot of English projects, they'll make you read books that are coming of age stories.
Mhm.
And so this made me think about those times when I had to read those types of stories. And so it's like this idea of a story about a person long ago growing up and living their life and trying going to school or being a part of an institution, and sort of the characters involved and how they grow and move through their life, how they grow into their life that they eventually live. But it all stems from that root time of their coming of age era.
Yeah, completely agree. And how would you pitch this movie to someone that hasn't seen it before?
Ooh. How do you pitch Wes Anderson's Grand Budapest Hotel? Let me think. I would pitch it in. Do you like sweet sweet but sad fantasy romps? Oh, whimsical romps.
Yeah, I
You
think
should
that's a really good way to describe it. You know, I think kind of like we've talked about, I really enjoy this film because I think it's like the best of what Wes Anderson does.
100%.
He's using, every aspect of what he does really well in terms of like you talked about the ratios, the cinematography is perfect. The guy that he uses for that, the cast is perfect. I mean, just everything that he does well is done extremely well in this movie. It's pretty much a masterpiece, and yeah, I think it's like if you want to dip your toe in his world, like this is like probably the best thing you could see.
Yeah, if you wanted to like see the like, to date pinnacle Wes Anderson, this would be the best way to go through it. And
Yeah.
then watch his other stuff. Because if you can digest this movie, you can get into the other movies. Because the other movies may turn you off if you're not prepared for them, the way their
Yeah, I feel
style
like
is.
Life Aquatic and some of the other ones, they're so hyper stylistic that I don't know, they're different than this movie a little bit.
Yeah, they're also intense, straight weirdly intense
Yeah,
movies.
they're quirky and odd and like
Yeah,
more so than this film, for
this
sure.
this movie feels more like a traditional movie because it has sort of plot. It has like
Yeah.
more like feels like traditional plot because there is a MacGuffin. So another shout
Yes.
out to Movies with Mikey because there's an observation that he has that I really enjoy about this movie is oh come on brain don't fail me now come
Oh,
on
no, it always does that when you're
yeah
recording.
always
I know how to.
100%. But regardless, sorry for my brain has left me.
No,
But
no worries.
yes, it's definitely a movie worth checking out, 100%. Um,
Mhm.
if you, it's definitely, I would say, if you like movies for being movies, this is definitely one you need to watch.
Yeah, if you love film, like, if you
Yes,
just like the cinematic experience,
if you
it's
just
yeah.
like film. Oh, now I remember. Haha! I
Oh,
told you. I
good.
knew I
I
remembered.
knew it would come back to you.
Yeah. So the idea is the reason why Grand Budapest Head is Movies with Mikey considers it one of Wes Anderson's best, and even you think it's the best, is because it fits his whimsical style very well because it's an unreliable story.
Yeah.
It's a
Oh,
modern.
yeah.
It's
It's
a
it's hyper reality, yeah.
right, right. It's you being 30 years older telling your kids or someone else about a story when you were younger, so you're just
Mm.
hitting the high points, the beats. You're hitting the big parts. You're not giving all the gritty details. And the listener is filling in the blanks on their own. And Wes
Wow, that's a really
Anderson
good way
does
of
that.
putting it.
Yeah. And so when you go back in time, the story gets more outrageous, right?
Mhm.
Like funny thing Mikey points out, a lot of people die in this movie, but it's almost all off screen.
Oh, that's true. It's like more of a, and then this happened kind of
Yes,
thing.
and this happened, and then you move on and you go to the more interesting and fun part of the story
Mhm.
rather than the sad part of the story, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why it works best with Wes Anderson's style, because that whimsy feels like warranted. It's allowed.
Yeah.
In
Huh.
like something like a Life Aquatic, where it's ostensibly our reality, our life, our modern life, that whimsy doesn't feel right because life is not that whimsical,
Yeah,
or
that
that
movie's just wacky
yeah, that
almost.
movie is
I still
wacky.
like it, but it's
No,
not my
no,
favorite of his.
you should still watch it and still
Yeah.
enjoy it, but it's the suspension of disbelief concept, right?
Uh-huh.
Because it is a story being told through an unreliable narrator, you give it a lot more leniency for not being real.
I'm gonna have to examine this thought and think about other movies that are like that I
Okay.
do enjoy because the narrator is unreliable. Hmm.
There are tons of them. That
Yeah.
is an entire subgenre. I remember, was it
Absolutely.
Memento is like the first one that really cracked my noodle about that.
Oh, yeah, I love that movie. It's
Yep.
such a good film.
It is a very, very good film. But
Yeah.
regardless, I'm glad I remembered my thought.
I am too. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for coming back. Where can people find you?
You can find me on the internet, mostly on Twitter at Bioimportance, or my show at Polyhedron Cast. You just look up Polyhedron or Polyhedron Podcast on any of your podcatchers if you enjoy RPGs. That's generally how you can find us, or find me and my co-host Ryan and Scott, where we do the show.
Great. Well, thank you again, and hope to have you back soon. You'll have to think of something else to come back on
Oh,
and
yeah,
talk
absolutely,
about.
100%. I can talk about movies all day, every day.
Awesome.
But yes, I will think of something good for next time. I appreciate being on. Thank you very much.